Ahaha.
Keep that in.
Why is that so funny to you?
What is going on, guys?
Why is that so funny to you?
Because I wasn't expecting it. Anyways.
Salam, guys. Welcome to Thoughtful Banter.
What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Thoughtful Banter podcast. You patrons make everything possible. That's why we're giving you the special shout out that we do at the beginning of every single episode, because you guys have been putting money in our pocket and we haven't done anything for you, and we appreciate it.
Money in our pocket, fat stacks. Shout out to Deadman, Asad, Ali, Ahmed, Latifa, Ali again, but a different one, T-Jam, Justin, and Muhammad. Thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast. We don't know what we do without you. Dr. Sheikh Faiyaz Jaffer is a research scholar for the Islamic Center at New York University and an associate chaplain for the Center of Global and Spiritual Life at NYU. He holds a doctorate in education from New York University with a focus on the identity development of Shia youth in the United States. Pursuing the classical course of Islamic education, he studied in the seminary of Karbala, Iraq, one of the most prominent centers for Islamic learning. As a faith leader and social activist, Dr. Sheikh Jaffer has lectured at various universities, seminars, and workshops across the United States, Canada, Europe, East Africa, and the Middle East, everywhere. As a highly sought-after lecturer and religious leader, he regularly leads prayer services and delivers sermons across North America. Due to the political and social climate, he has been making strides in the greater New York area by taking part in several interfaith seminars, discussions, with the goal of increasing dialogue with faith leaders. In addition to his role at NYU's Islamic Center, Dr. Sheikh Jaffer serves as the adjacent assistant professor of public services of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. While he teaches courses on Islamic law and Islamic spirituality, and his research has appeared in academic journals. Thanks for watching the clip. Alright, so guys, hope you guys enjoy this video.
Thank you so much once again, Sheikh, for coming on and spending your time with us. So let's just jump right into it. I guess, so you started talking about your research and what you were studying during your PhD, and that's actually exactly the way we wanted to shift the conversation. Specifically, first though, before we get into the details, like nitty gritty of that, I know you also spent time overseas in Najaf in the Hawza. So I guess my question is, how would you compare and contrast like that Islamic model of education that you had in Najaf overseas versus the higher education that you experienced in the West? And then have you thought of ways of maybe like adapting that to something that maybe it's not exactly that, because I don't think you can just copy paste like learning models onto different societies necessarily, but maybe adapting it in a way that could fit the Western model.
So first of all, thank you guys for having me. Happy to be here. As for my studies overseas, they were actually in Karbala, not in Najaf. But undoubtedly the style or methodology of learning is really, really similar in a seminary sort of setting in comparison with a sort of Western university academic setting, right? The ultimate goal of any academic institution is to produce students who are able to sort of perceive, understand, digest, and then sort of explain their knowledge base. And I think both of them naturally have their own methodologies based on culture, based on environment, based on caliber or quality of student, and whatnot. But naturally, they're going to be different as well, In a sort of a more seminary style education, we virtually go through, what is probably the most defined parallel is like a guided reading, for instance. There's like a book. It's like a really, really important classical textbook, many of those which are behind me right now, for instance. And we read the book A to Z, from beginning to end. Teacher reads it, stops, discusses where things are important, offers clarifications on language that might be sort of challenging to understand to the student. After reading through however many pages based on how much time is designated in that class, thereafter there's like room for conversation and discussion. Mm-hmm. In a university setting, right, in a Western university setting, it's like we're going to give you this information, you're going to read it, and then you're going to come back to class like with a discussion, or question or clarification. They both have their pros and cons naturally. In other words, in a university, in this country, most students probably don't do the reading. Well, you probably digest more because you're allotted so much reading. While in a seminary, you're told to read the book A to Z, so you're actually reading less, more likely than not, right? But hopefully you're able to sort of digest and understand what it is that you're reading, as opposed to just acknowledging like most students do. In all settings, you have poor students and you have good students, those who are more focused, those who are diligent, those who care about what it is that they're seeking, they're going to do a good job. And those who like are just trying to go through the motions, trying to do like the most bare bones sort of, let me get past the stage, they're going to be like what they're going to be at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
This is your field. Yeah.
Okay. So again, you said your research was basically in the area of developing Shia identity.
On the identity development.
Identity development. There we go. Identity development of Shia also.
I'm really curious to know, like, what did you think you would find, and what did you find there? If that's something you're actually able to talk about. I don't know if it is, but
I could talk about it.
I think just bouncing off of that is a good question, because a lot of times people have aspirations of like going overseas and studying, and then they get there and they're like, their mirror is just shattered, like their world is just shattered because it wasn't the way they expected, the exact way they expected it to be. So if you could speak to some of that experience.
So let me speak to that first, maybe, and then I'll bring it into kind of my research. For sure. I think that when we talk about, visitation to shrine cities, for instance, we're talking about studying in the Islamic seminary. There's this perception, that you're going to be in the company of the greatest of, God's creations, right? The most noble and most, sort of sincere members of religious clergy, and many of them, undoubtedly are. And I was so privileged to have many teachers and mentors who I still maintain my relationship with till this very day, that are able to kind of set me forth or ground me or answer questions or inquiries, and really most importantly be a good role model when it comes to etiquette, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to reminding me what my role or responsibility is, right, at the end of the day. And so a lot of people, they have this perception that like going to study overseas will mirror everything that they hear on the pulpit, for instance, right? About these, individuals who devoted themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have these sort of miraculous, unveilings taking place on a daily or nightly basis or whatever it might be, and you're going to be in the company of that. But in reality, at the end of the day, like again, any academic setting resembles or is sort of a microcosm of like the culture or community that you live in. You're going to have the good, and you're also going to have the bad, in addition to a lot of the countries where many of these seminaries are situated. We're talking about countries and communities that have been sort of war torn, poverty stricken, and so on. So you're going to see again a manifestation of that also present amongst the student population. So that's something to keep in mind. Even if I compare it to higher education in the United States, right? I work at New York University, my degree there as well. I work with students on a day-to-day basis, which is my primary work, right? And you're going to see a wide variety of diverse students, and members of the community, those who like really want to be, involved in sort of, Muslim student engagement, and those who don't want to be. Those who are really, really sort of in tune with their studies and want to be the best that they can be and utilize their degree as a means to an end, right? Meaning that I'm going to utilize this degree and I'm going to get a job and I'm going to change the world. Or there are other people who see their degree as a means to get a paycheck, right? And everyone has their own circumstances and situations why they think the way that they think. Maybe people come from a lower, socioeconomic scale. So the only thing they could think about is graduating so they can make money, so they can pay their bills, so they can pay out their debts, so they can support their families, whatever it might be. And that's fine, right? But to keep in mind that there's a diversity always, and it really sort of stems from where you're at, internally. And I think that's the case in any quest for knowledge, right? Where are you at internally? Where's your heart at? In other words, what are you setting goals? Or you have objectives? Do you have intentions? what is your intentionality behind why you're doing what it is that you're doing? I think like materialization of success is that which is facilitated by the world of the unseen, right? God will take care of that, right? And really, if someone is sincere, I think, and they're trying to do things that are meaningful with their education, the opportunity to find or to facilitate or to materialize in a meaningful way is undoubtedly sort of like within God's hands, so to say. It doesn't mean that we just kind of sit back and be like, oh, I'm sincere, I'm gonna like hang out and like it's all gonna happen.
Yeah.
But that, there's certainly a part of it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Does that help answer your question?
No, it does. It makes sense. And you're probably like in such an interesting predicament because, like you said, like I just can't imagine. Like it must be overwhelming, honestly, because like you're in this place that it's just there's just so many different kinds of people with different backgrounds, and you're in a position where like you're there to probably serve like all of them. Like you have a responsibility to all the students that that come to you. I'm just curious, and I know this is like it's a very general question, but what is like the most common predicament that students have that they come to you with? Like, Sheikh, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. Like what is like that most common thing that it is?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly, if I were to answer that question as broadly as possible, I would say it's relationships. Relationship with oneself, relationship with God, relationship with friends, relationship with family, relationship with significant other, relationship with professor, relationship with school administration, relationships more broadly, And I think that, my role, as chaplain, as taking a look at sort of, things through like a religious or sort of theological lens, when I'm answering or I'm communicating with these students, is to, seek toward reconciling, how they're doing or how to offer them support as they're navigating through that moment, that they're in, So it's not only that they got into a fight with their friend, but like we can sort of identify to something, a lot more problematic, that you're always getting into fights with your friends, like what's going on? Or like I had this sort of falling out with my parents, or like, well, what is it that caused this falling out with your parents? Or was it just something that happened like yesterday? You got into an argument about finances or something, or how much money you spent, on campus and they stole your credit card bill. I don't know, right? And then of course we see things that are a lot more sort of serious, where someone looks at themselves in the mirror and they hate themselves, and there's sort of this sort of, I don't know what to call it, but, how we can help an individual improve their relationship with their self. Or, you commit a sin or sort of get involved in something that you shouldn't have got yourself involved in. And now, you feel worthless, right? Someone feels, how can I pray to God? Like, we hear this sort of rhetoric so often, like, who am I to like worship, like, this God of ours? Says, no, like you need to improve your relationship with God to understand that no matter what you do, like God's door is open for you, So I think that, if I talk about things, more broadly, relationships more broadly, but sort of connected to that tangentially, anything under the sun really, on a day-to-day basis, suicidal ideation, domestic abuse, rape, everything, unfortunately, people go through a lot of stuff, unfortunately, and where I'm sort of privileged and blessed is I'm able to help people, and I think there's no benefit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afforded me other than that.
I mean, it must be just tremendously overwhelming. I'm just curious, when you see, I mean, you're talking about like talking about relationships, just like generally, like relationships, maybe I would phrase that in my mind, like I think of relationships as also like perception, right? Like how you perceive the world around you, how you interact with the world around you. Within relationships, is there something that really stands out to you that's like very common that you think, oh, hey, like I'm noticing specifically, for example, like Muslim guys like 18 to 22, they have like this specific problem, or like women, like they have this specific problem. Like what are our communities missing? Yeah, like there's some kind of, maybe there's something
our communities can do to like fill the gap.
Where are we not filling these gaps with these kids that, like I think one thing that actually my mother-in-law was talking about, his mother was talking about holistic education. She was saying that she notices as an educator that a lot of our kids in our communities, we focus so much on the educational aspect of things. We focus so much on making sure they get those straight A's and get the SAT scores, that they have all these gaps. And then when they go to college by themselves, and they have no family there, and maybe they have no friends there, maybe a couple friends, everything collapses because the whole focus was just on the intellectual aspect of things. Where do you see those gaps being in students you went into?
That's an excellent question. First of all, I had no idea you guys are brother-in-laws. This is really, really cute. Not Alhamdulillah. I would say communication, right? You're right? There's such a focus many a times on like academics, right, to the detriment of our social interaction, and it's so problematic. And I would say beyond sort of the student population that I serve, there's individuals based on sort of my travels or sort of my speaking engagements or so on, across the country that reach out to me, where they're encountering, where they're encountering an obstacle with regards to their marital relations, for instance, right? I don't get along with my wife doesn't get along with me, right? Something like that. My husband, is not receptive to me, and we don't communicate properly, right? A million different issues naturally that arise because we're talking about two different people who come from two different worlds, who have two different experiences, who have two different sets of baggage. Now they're entering into like one roof, and now they got to figure it out. It's hard, right? No one said it's easy. So I would say that where we can kind of fill those gaps is to create conversations around sort of healthy communication, maybe I'll call it, right? And healthy communication is not only limited to two people, but it's again also the way that you communicate with yourself. You have to understand, I have to understand that there are certain responsibilities that I have as an individual, then I also have certain responsibilities to my spouse, to my friend, to my partner at work, to my classmate, to my employer, to my fellow sort of employees, whatever it might be, right? So how can we communicate adequately? We live in a world that we're sort of bombarded with emails and text messages, right? And text-based sort of, conversation, often to the detriment of our ability to talk face-to-face, and so many an issue arise from like, our communication via text, as opposed to, our ability to speak, face-to-face with people. No one wants to get into arguments, right? It's not comfortable. We don't like to argue. We don't, we love to push away, having to deal with hard or difficult conversations. And I'd rather just text that fight, right? Rather than like have that fight face-to-face when things, voices can be raised and things can be thrown, obviously you get what I'm saying. So communication, I would say, undoubtedly is number one.
I mean, it's just like, I think COVID, people were talking about like the kids that grew up during, COVID, like those 2 years of quarantine. I'm hearing teachers talk about that now, like not this sounds like I'm making fun of people. I don't intend to, but it's like these kids are awkward, right. Like a lot of kids. I mean, my generation is awkward too. I'm just looking down as in like the younger they are, they're just getting more and more awkward. Like the kids who are growing up more with these. I remember distinctly the day no one wanted to come outside to play because everyone had an Xbox. Like I remember that shift. I remember I used to play outside every day with my friends. And then just in the neighborhood, just knocking on kids' doors. And then it was, no, we don't want to play with you, man. We got an Xbox at home,
Yeah, for sure. Just to kind of like talk back that point, right? Like, first of all, like, Muslim kids already have like socially awkward sort of interactions on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, exactly.
Based on our cultures and based on our upbringings and whatnot, right? And then you add this, added layer of technology, right? And you added a layer of COVID, and sort of how that has kind of really exasperated the issue in so many ways, amplified it, tenfold, right? And so communication undoubtedly is not only limited to young people though as a challenge, right? To anyone and to everyone. It's hard to have difficult conversations, and so I think that all of these, aspects that you speak to also demonstrate kind of in the long term the potential for even more heartache, right, around how to navigate relationships more broadly. So, absolutely, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I don't mean to turn this into like a Q&A, but I do have a question. So I guess my question is piggybacking off of the things that you guys were talking about. I know a lot of people, this is like has to do with drugs. So a lot of people, they will talk about certain drugs, psychedelics or whatever, giving them these spiritual experiences and how it's like increased their spirituality. And this is an idea I've been playing with in my head, but I'm not sure how sound it is. This is why I'm just running it by you. Does Islam value the real hard, difficult work being put in to achieve like the rewards of the outcome? So what I mean by that is, like you guys were saying, it's hard to have these conversations in person. It's hard. We do these things over text. We live in this social media world because it's quick and it's easy, and you don't have to go through the difficulty of like going to the gym, for example, and working out to build muscle. Right. So how does, like, I guess, Islam align with that concept that I just described, that you guys have been talking about and I just described?
Yeah. I think before I even like try to answer that question, I would say, like, why do you think that it's so important that there's like a value or incentive of reward? Because you mentioned that, like, does Islam reward having tough conversations? And kind of like a rhetorical question, I don't mean to throw that back to you, but like, why are we so fixated as like Muslims on reward in the first place, right? Like, reward is, a means to an end. It should not be the end in and of itself. If the end is God, right? Reward is the means to the end. Imagine I go to my employer and I'm like, hey, boss, let me tell you that, I hate this job, I hate you, right? But I like the paycheck that you pay me, So keep paying me, and while I'm here, why don't you also give me a 10% raise? Like that's it would, like it's not appropriate, right?
I wish. I said I wish it was appropriate.
Right. So at the end of the day, right, it's like more about us sort of like realigning or resetting like this intentionality again that we kind of spoke about before, right? So the intention is to find God, right? The intention in this relationship is to make it a fruitful relationship, right? With my spouse, with my child, with my parent, with my friend, with my whoever. At the end of the day, it shouldn't always be about, like, oh, like, is Allah rewarding me for this? No, you're doing the right thing. It's the right thing to do. The reward will come. That will, is definitely there. We love to tangentify, I don't know if that's a word, but you get what I'm saying. Like, we want something physical. We want something physical for everything that we do, And like, if we're living this sort of transactional lifestyle, there's never going to be like real benefit. Anything that we do, that we're not going to put any meaning into it, You follow what I'm saying? The reward will come. Yeah. Paradise is ours, inshallah. Don't worry about that part.
No, I appreciate that reframing. I'm I'm an economics major, and so some of the, everything is about like
money,
satisfaction and all this stuff, right? So I was speaking in that way because that's just how the way I've been speaking throughout the semester, basically. But I like the way that you reframed that, because it spoke to something that I also want to ask another question about. And that is basically, I've been noticing a trend from other scholars that are present on social media, and even the ones that aren't. And basically, it is a move away from like, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. Rather, it's like Allah is the most forgiving. And I think from one of the clips from your Instagram specifically said, hell is the exception. And I thought that really resonated with me, and that really resonates with a lot of people, especially people who have kind of grown up with the don't do this, you're going to hell. I mean, it's basically the exact opposite of what you just said. You're like, do this, you'll get rewarded. Don't do this because you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
When maybe the frame should be, do this, it'll get you closer to God.
Yeah.
Don't do this, it might take you further away.
You see, like, for me, I don't see it as kind of like a trend away from what you've always heard, or like I'm trying to present something new, and because a lot of people, they tell me that, right? And I'm not saying you were saying that specifically, but I travel, fairly often to like different religious communities, and everyone tells me like, hey, like, talk about paradise like a lot, like we appreciate that. And for me, it's like, I'm happy that you're benefiting from what I'm presenting in front of you, but what I'm presenting is not anything new, right? What it is in sort of my estimation is an authentic reading, of the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhim assalam, right? And it's and unfortunately, it's like our rhetoric, our culture, community, upbringing, whatever, that we've been bombarded with all of this negative image around like God, around religion, around faith. Like I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's not complicated, right? Islam, religion, getting to our ultimate goal, right? Of perfection, paradise on the way, getting closer. That is very difficult and challenging. And anyone, going back to your point about people who are intoxicating themselves or doing drugs and they're saying, oh, this makes me, they don't know like what spirituality is then, right? Like that's not, they might say that that's spiritual. That's not spiritual, right? That's not spirituality. We have just identified anything that makes us feel a different way. Oh, this is spirituality. No, that's not the case, right? We have firm definitions, that are sort of within a framework that allow for us to cultivate that reality, right? So our perceptions then around religion are so negative, naturally, on the basis of our upbringing. Now, how can we sort of shift that to like a more authentic reading, a more authentic approach toward understanding our religion? So going back to this point, and I'll pass it back to you guys. It's like I said before, attaining like the height that we're seeking to is challenging, but religion essentially is not complicated, right? You fulfill your obligations and you stay away from the prohibitions, right? You fulfill your responsibilities, you be a good person, right? And it's finished. Like that, it's done. Right? Right? Like you believe in what you've been told to believe. We believe in a God. We believe in a Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We believe in this Quran. We submit to their family, to his family, alayhi wasallam, those who have been appointed by God, right? So that's our belief. And then law is staying away from that which is haram, doing that which is obligatory. That's like number 2, law. And then 3 is ethics. Ethics is be a good person, right? Finished. That's it. 3 points. Believe, practice, be. It's finished. There's nothing more to it. You know what I'm trying to say? We complicate all the issues, right? And I'm not saying that it's easy to do all those things. It's challenging. But what in life is not challenging? You talked about you can't go to the gym, right?
Yeah.
And just like walk around the gym, and all of a sudden you're going to come out, looking like I don't know who, right? But then you have to work hard for it. But at the end of the day, we can simplify it and say like eat healthy and exercise regularly, right? And you're good, you're healthy, your physical body's healthy. No one's gonna say that eating healthy and exercising regularly is easy, right? We'll just say if we simplify it, it's just these 2 things, and that's what it is. Religion is 3 things: believe, do the law, follow the law, and be a good person. Finish. That's it. Alhamdulillah.
I really like your point about we associate these things that give us a specific feeling, and we call it spirituality.
Yeah.
And I think one example that I always go back to is something that Sayyid Sulaiman had said before, and he said, if you are like obligated to go to war and like do jihad, for example, and you come back and you have PTSD, like you might not feel good, but what you did was spiritual, So I just thought that was a nice.
Say that word on this podcast. I'll be careful.
I just got that out. The feds.
I can use a different example, but
I'll edit it. Don't worry.
The point there.
I think it's such a prevalent point for our generation. I mean, that's something that you see it all the time, and I don't know what it is. I think maybe it has something to do with like a lot of Muslims happen to be immigrants, and I think a lot of people were coming here for better lives. And when you're in a stressful, I'm not a psychologist by any means, I'm over my head saying this, but I think it's fair to say when you're in a stressful environment, sometimes the way you communicate with people is a little bit more cut and dry because you have less time. Like you need your kid to listen to you. You're like, hey, don't do this, you're gonna go to hell. Like you try to use some kind of motivation just because you're trying to keep things in order. You don't have time for like this long, I guess more, I don't even say more complicated, but it just takes more time to process other information. And when you're trying to get things going, and then you come to this country, you work hard, and your children are listening to you, you settle down, and things are great, right? Like people got their money, they got their education, but their entire way of viewing God is yes and no. It's just binary. I sinned, I'm bad, and then do good because I should be doing good. But we forget about that most important element. It's like, Allah's all merciful.
Bouncing off of that, I'm not a parent yet, but in like parents how to be like raising of their children, what should they be doing instead? Because obviously we've had a whole generation affected by the do this, you're going to hell, do this, you're going to heaven. It doesn't seem to work. What are some alternatives? Like how would you suggest to a parent how they would, how they might raise their child? What things they should focus on? Not the specifics, obviously, but like
I mean, look, I'm not claiming to be, like an expert in this, nor am I claiming to have all the answers, but what I like to do in my own life, and certainly that which I speak to, is that which is sort of backed by some data or evidence, and undoubtedly to understand kind of the psychology of a child, right? And again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in this at all. If someone's watching and they're saying, what's this guy talking about, right? I'm an expert in this. No, I'm not trying to claim to be one, but to understand kind of the stages of a child's growth and development. For me, reading about that, listening to podcasts about that, discussing with experts about that has been really, really helpful. And I'm not claiming at all that I'm like this perfect father role model at all. Don't get me wrong. It's a learning process, so to say, for myself as well. And my kids are fairly young in comparison with probably many of the listeners and whatnot. But anyhow, to understand kind of their psychology, their development, and to take it easy and to understand stage by stage where they're at, what they're thinking. Let me give you an example. At a very young age, a child can only understand things via physical or tangible means. That's why they take things and put it in their mouth all the time. That's why they like to put their feet in water, for instance. That's why it's encouraged, for instance, and I've spoken to physicians about this, pediatricians, about, allowing for the kid to like roll in grass, when it's at a very young age, because it needs to be exposed to the nature and it likes the feeling of it and appreciates being under the sun and so on. I remember when my kids were really, really young, both of them, when they were about 2 years old, amongst their first sort of communications or things that they would get really, really excited about is whenever they would see the moon up in the sky. We'd be driving, looking out the window, you start screaming, moon, 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 right? It was like something really, really exciting, A child, when they see a rainbow, appear in the horizon. You ever seen like a kid, how happy that they get? Because we're exposed, naturally, we're innately kind of wired to appreciate nature. We grow up a little bit, the only thing we do is look at our phones, and we totally forget looking up at the sky, They get excited about rain, they get excited about snow. Now we're like so upset and annoyed when it's raining and snowing, right? Because our world, is only functional when it's a perfect, like sunny, beautiful day like it is today over here, at least in New York. For instance, I'm sure for you guys, it's 65 degrees, it's sunny, right? Hoodie weather, maybe, right? It's like nice, like peaceful, So, I think that understanding kind of where they're at and their development and stages is important on one end. The second thing is particularly with the relationship with God, to also speak with them in accordance with the level of their understanding. I want you to imagine like what goes on in the psychology, forget of, a child, but of someone who is perhaps within our age demographic. And I'm not claiming to be in your age demographic. I'm just trying to pretend like I'm around closer to your than than uncle status, right? But I will say that when you are consistently being told that if you do this, this is going to happen to you, it'll mess you up. You go to a college classroom, right? And your professor says, if you come 1 minute late, I'm deducting 3 points. You're going to hate that professor, right? You go to work and your job tells you, if you do this, like you're gone tomorrow, right? Like you're going to be penalized. You're never going to get a letter of recommendation even after I fire you, right? Just whatever, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want, or we're going to start removing money from your paycheck. Oh, that's it, finished. The most important thing to us is our wealth. Every day you come in late, I'm removing $5 from your paycheck. Right? You look at your week, shoot, like I lost $15 this week, right? I'm done. Like nobody wants to live under sort of that rule, So I think that when we perceive God as this oppressive God, right? We don't perceive God the way that he introduced himself as a just God. Do we fear somebody who's just? We don't fear anybody who's just. We love people who are just. We love people who are equitable. We love people who are fair. Allah is al-adil. He's the all-just. But our perception of him is he's a bottom, right? He's this oppressive God, this oppressive professor, this oppressive boss. No, that's not the case. We love someone, we appreciate someone who's equitable, someone who is fair. And in addition to that, he's the most merciful of those who show mercy. So in what world do I have this perception where I fear God? Going back to your point about, out of convenience, we tell our children, for instance, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. That's not I'm not blaming people who do that, because that's the way that they were probably taught themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're not putting in the intentionality to rewire ourselves and to re-communicate those things to our children. Then we're perpetuating the problem. In other words, that's not going to allow for real impact and growth, in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just something that's at the end of the day, we all know of, people, they go to college, and college is really that testing ground, especially if you travel, away from your hometown to go to school. And then, no one's perfect. People get exposed or get some kind of sin. And then that's a lot of times spiritually the snowball effect happens for people. It's like they commit a sin, and then they have that distorted relationship with Allah, where they're not looking at him as for his mercy. They're looking like, oh, I'm such a bad person. I've sinned, so I'm not even going to pray. Then they miss a couple of days of praying. So it's like things get worse and worse and worse. And it's like, well, this
going to hell anyway. Who cares?
Yeah, I'm going to hell in 2 weeks. I haven't missed a lot in 2 weeks. I'm not feeling spiritual at all. I'm feeling depressed, and all these things are happening because of this simple thing of how our relationships with Allah our relationship with Allah isn't framed the way that He has intended it to be. I mean, that's just something that you probably see all the time. I'm curious to know, what do you do when you're talking to someone, a college student? They're not adults, but they're adults. As in their problems are their problems now. What do you tell someone who's 20 is coming to you, and maybe they don't even know that's their problem, that they have a messed up relationship with Allah? But what do you tell someone who doesn't even know that that's their issue, and you can see it as their issue? And how do you break that down? How does that conversation even go?
Well, I would say for someone who's 20 years old, someone who's a college student, number one, they're absolutely an adult, right?
Yeah.
They own that adulthood. Number two, I would say it's a lot easier for me to communicate to them than it is for me to communicate to the 45-year-old, 50-year-old man, or woman. Because for someone who's 20, and they're that really formative period in their life, when they're a college student, they're around diversity, they're still sort of in this state of intellectual curiosity and so on. It's much easier for me to just tell them straight up, your relationship with God is totally a mess, right? I mean, I wouldn't say it that way, but you get what I'm saying. I'll be able to present it in a way and package it in a way where hopefully they'll be able to digest that fairly sort of adequately. For someone, who's been sort of layered with that now for decades, right? 3, 4, 5, 6 decades of their life, bombarded with, this really strange understanding of who God is, and God hates me, and everything bad that happens to me is because, I get sick, I trip and I fall. Oh my God, Allah hates me. Why did Allah do this to me? No, I invested my money in the market and everything, everything lost. I lost X amount of money. Why did Allah do this to me? No, man, you should have done your research before you invested in that, right? The markets are very terrible, right? I should work it, right? So we have this perception that God plays a very direct role in our life at every given moment, when that's not the case. God creates laws that govern this universe, laws of cause and effect, for instance. Right. And sort of any student or sort of anyone who understands kind of basic Islamic theology, it's not such that we are so important in God's eyes that every time we make a mistake, He punishes us. And every time that we do something good, He unveils some reward for us. When we're coming back home from work, we find a briefcase of $100, of $1 million because I gave $1 in charity. That's not how it works. There are causes and effects, right? In this world that we live in. Yes, we put in an effort and God will facilitate for us, but it won't be sort of through some miraculous means. So I would say that, for someone who's a lot younger, it's very easy to package it in a way and be very deliberate, demonstrating to them that, hey, I think that the reason why you're feeling this way and you're seeing things that way is because you don't know that God is like this merciful God who actually wants your success and cares about you, you know? Well, on the flip side, for someone who's been bombarded with this, decades worth of rhetoric about how God hates him or her, it's much more challenging. But at the same time, the potential is always there. And it's just about them having that ability to truly be receptive to what it is, that is this authentic reading of our religious tradition. If that makes sense.
So, I do have a question, because honestly, I myself have a slight concern, and not necessarily with you, but maybe with other people I've
Bring
seen.
it, even if you have it with me, just go for it, man.
Break it down.
Maybe other like people on social media who push this line of God is all merciful. All of this is true, but maybe what do you think about the idea that perhaps there, in some cases, there is an overcorrection, in the sense where people then start feeling that there is nothing that they could do to incur God's wrath.
Yeah.
Because I think people are prone to like binaries, like it's either all this way or all one way. And then maybe the argument could be made even that maybe it's better that someone is like hesitant of everything they do because they think they're gonna go to hell, than someone who just goes all in with the sin and is like, oh, God will forgive me. So where's that balance?
Let's get lit.
My real question is like, how do we strike that balance?
Yeah.
And then I guess speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the balance sort of is demonstrated in that prophetic hadith in which he states, لا يكون مؤمن مؤمنا حتى يكون خائفا رجاء, that a believer is not a believer until they are both fearful and hopeful. Fearful to incur that wrath, punishment, accountability, but at the same time hopeful of the mercy and compassion. There has to be that, right? If there's not that, then we've lost everything. We've failed to understand, that God is, this merciful God, but again, he's also the just God, right? And remember that it is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that precedes his wrath, as is mentioned within the Quran, as mentioned within the hadith literature. Rahmati sabaqat ghadaba, that my mercy precedes wrath. In addition to that, God, like we know, introduces himself as, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, consistently, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and so on. But at the same time, undoubtedly, God is the most merciful of those who show mercy, but he's also shadidul iqab, he is swift in his punishment, right? We understand that. I would say that, number one, if someone, falls or sort of sees things only through binaries, that burden of responsibility doesn't fall, on the one who's putting out a 30-second reel on Instagram, right? But it falls upon the individual for failing to know what their responsibility is. But I'm not saying that in any way to sort of sound defensive, right? I would say it in a way to understand kind of the way that I understand, or the way that I see through my personal lens, like community and like religious development. I see people, or I talk to people every single day who have no inclination or desire to, engage their religious tradition at all. Obviously, I believe, in a God. I believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I love and devote myself to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, right? And so my perception is that it is so beautiful and so pure, and something that I love so much, and that if I have the opportunity to change other people's perception of who God is, I can also help them change their perception of who they are, of who those around them are, of how to rebuild community and society, how to engage in community building more adequately, right? There's a lot of needs in this world because we talked about all of the gaps that people are seeing. We have poverty, we have homelessness, we have suicidal ideation, we have domestic violence and abuse. We have a whole host of various issues that we can come to the forefront of sort of reconciling. But if we are not truly grounded in terms of our relationship with God, we're just going to give up on life entirely, So that hope is so non-existent in the world, There are plenty of people, who are going to feed that opposite extreme. And the only thing that it does is it completely removes, I hear what you're saying. Maybe people who are so fearful of hell, they're so cautious about their actions on a day-to-day basis. No, I would say that someone who loves God, someone who sees God's mercy, they would be that much more cautious about their deeds and actions. Because why would you ever want to disappoint a God that loves you? Why would you ever want to disappoint someone that cares about you? Let me give you an example. Like our mothers love us, right? And even if our mother never scolds us or screams at us or penalizes us or holds us to account, when we do something wrong, we're gonna have this sense of guilt that, oh man, if my mother knew like what I did, I would be so disappointed. How disappointed would she be? And I would say the same thing when you love your place of employment, you love your work, you love your colleagues, you don't want to let them down. I hear this from athletes all the time. I'm a big sports fan. I'm a depressed New York Knicks fan.
Depressed Knicks fan.
Yeah, right. So I watch a lot of basketball, I watch a lot of football, right? And it's like I hear these athletes talking, and they're like, I did it for my teammates. That's like what they're injured and they're still playing. They're putting forth because they love them, they appreciate them, they see this like unique bond. Now, imagine our relationship with God. We don't want to disappoint God. So I'm going to be that much more careful with my actions, with my interactions, with my prayers, with my focus, my diligence, based on that relationship, And I truly, sincerely believe that by sort of transitioning anyone's sort of relationship with God, like a lot of the other tangential obstacles and challenges and experiences that we endure have the ability to kind of be navigated more adequately and appropriately.
Do you feel like? Thank you for that. I mean, that was beautiful, mashallah.
If I have to end on that one,
yeah, if I have to end there just because it was so beautiful. But now this is just like a thought to my head. Like, do you feel like this just came to me like when you and Hussein are going back and forth between this? To me, it feels like from what I've seen and from my own experience, I feel like that's probably the thing that holds back religious people the most. Like religious people, like people who grew up believing, trying their best, is the fact that when they sin, they feel like they lose momentum because of that inclination in their head, of the entire association, right? Of thinking like, oh, lost momentum, might as well not make salat. Already missed my prayer, so I'm just gonna not pray today. Do you find that to be true in your perception?
I think so. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And I think if you kind of take a look at the flip side of it, right? You take a look at the best of examples, take a look at the Prophet take a look at the Imams back in the day, they would devote themselves in worship and obedience to God. And, people would come to them and be like, why are you like spending so much time worshiping, like you're the messenger of God. You're the commander of the faithful. You don't even have any sins. Like, what are you worried about? But they respond, and why should I not be in this state? This is the Lord of the world. I love to be in communication with the Lord of the world. So when you have that like relationship with God, it's not because of this layer of sin or something, it's because you appreciate what it is that you're doing and you value it, and you also then feel different. We're talking about spirituality, whatever. Not only do you feel, but you see benefit and growth via it. It offers you a sense of contentment. That with the remembrance of God, right, we find this contentment of heart. So our entire sort of understanding, our entire life, our entire perception of ourselves, of God, of everything that we're encountering around us, completely is transformed once we sort of engage in this, sort of very intimate relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask God to sort of, take us there, inshallah, and with His love, fill our hearts so that we're able to feel that same sense of inspiration, motivation, and desire.
Inshallah. Sheikh, how long do we have you for?
I'm good for 6 more minutes.
6 more minutes. Okay. If you don't mind, we've covered. I actually like this because we had our own questions lined up, but I like having an organic conversation is always better. But since we have 6 more minutes, I actually wanted to.
You kind of covered a lot of what we
covered almost everything, but I have one question that wasn't covered.
The first question you asked about my research. We never even talked about it, but that's okay.
That's true. We'll have to have you on a second time, inshallah. Part two. I was just curious to know, like, what is the MSAs are oftentimes not a space that is a majority filled with Shias. I just wanted to ask, what is that struggle like in campuses? Like how are Shia students doing with that? And what can be done to assist them?
Yeah, It's a pretty tough question. It's something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, sort of in my work. Like you guys might know, most Muslim student groups on American college campuses are pretty like male dominated. They're pretty like South Asian Desi dominated, and they're pretty like Sunni dominated as well. So to that neglect, it isolates anyone who is non-Desi or non-Arab. Maybe if I even broaden the scope a little bit, it immediately isolates women, and it isolates anyone who does not identify as Sunni. And so at the end of the day, we're talking about a group of individuals in this really formative age period of their lives, like we said before, 18 to 25 or so. They're trying to like navigate, struggle, figure things out in their own lives. The thing that they want the most is the sense of belonging, what we call the sense of belonging, right? It's one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You guys might be familiar with something you guys studied from high school, college, whatever. Everyone loves community. Everyone loves family. Everyone loves to be around people who love them and care about them. And we innately desire that as a human being, no doubt about it. It's even sort of well-grounded within religious text. And so over here, we're talking now about Shia students. If I were to add additional layers to that, many of those who are South Asian, non-Arab. If I were to add another layer to that, those who are women, they encounter what we call multiple marginalities. They're sort of pushed out further to the periphery, and they have that much more of an obstacle in terms of finding community or finding that sense of belonging that we're talking about. And it has the ability to create so much more of a challenge at a time in their lives where it's already challenging to be a human being. Now, more than that, right, from that age group, more than that, you're a Muslim. More than that, you encounter Islamophobia. More than that, you encounter sort of issues around gender-based sort of things. And then in addition to that, now you encounter Shia phobia, right? And you're sort of, now that's challenging. Like it is really, really, really hard, because a college student already deals with, food insecurity, already deals with economics and, paying off their tuitions, already is encountering, difficulties around their mental health, depression and anxiety amongst college students are at sort of exorbitant rates, right? Like I'm sure that you're all familiar with. So over here, what can we do to assist them? Amongst those things that we can do to assist them is seek toward creating communities and linking them up with individuals who are similar to them. That goes a really long way toward any individual's growth and development. So a lot of the work that I do is help in building out and supporting different college campuses and students on their respective college campuses to create, for instance, Ahlul Bayt student associations, ABSAs, or things that are similar to that, Shia student, groups, or provide some sort of programming or networking, such that they're able to realize that they're not in this alone, that they're able to find some sense of community, so that it also doesn't take away from the fact that their ultimate responsibility is to be a student, but this can supplement them, where the fact that they have others that they can communicate with, share experiences with, so on and so forth, on campus, so they can be the best student they can be, sort of in the process, if that makes sense. This is a longer conversation.
It does. Yeah,
I know.
I'm sorry.
It's like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Well, inshallah, we have you on a second time. And before you let us go, is there a way that people can reach you, support you? What's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they ever want to book you? Plug in whatever you got, the podcast. What's the best way people can reach you and contact you and support what you do?
I appreciate that. You can hit me up on social media at Faiyaz Jaffer, Faiyaz Jaffer. I'm most accessible via email for booking, speaking engagements, whatever it might be, fj490@nyu.edu. FJ, my initials, 490@nyu.edu. You can catch you can catch my podcast, which is released every night during the month of Ramadan, hopefully more often than that if time permits. It's called Sheikhing It Up with Sheikh Faiyaz. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play. Sheikhing It Up with Sheikh Faiyaz. I have an archive of 150 plus 15-minute short talks that hopefully you'll find inspiring and beneficial, and hopefully it doesn't put you to sleep like many others have told me. But I think, I really appreciate you guys having me, and hopefully this conversation was beneficial for all the listeners. It was fun for me for sure.
It was one for us as well. Thank you so much for joining. It was
it went by quick.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. I'm happy to hear that. All right, guys. I'll see you all soon, inshallah.
All right, thank you. I like him.
All right, take care. Like